Hey, I'm Steven, and I invented the Unibräu brew system. Today, I'm going to show you the premium build of our Unibräu. I'm going to set it up in 240 volts, but the 240 volt and the 120 volt setups are very similar. Just the 120 has a double element, and the Whirlpool arm moves to the top port instead of the back port. But from this video, you should know everything that you need to know how to set up the premium setup, okay? So let's get started. So what I've got here is I have the grain, the kettle, and the retention ring here. I've got the lid. I've got a grain basket and the lid down over here. We have here the Whirlpool Arm Kit. We've got the Sparge arm. We've got the 120 volt controller. This would be used in the 240 setup along with the SV240 controller. But for this purposes, we don't need to bring that in. We've got the filter plate and dip tube, the hot block. We have the 4-valve kit here, and we have the butterfly valve fitting kit, the pump, and the brewing element. Let's just talk about the filter plate before I install it. It's got a silicone seal in the bottom, and you can see here it's got quite a fine mesh to block it out. It doesn't block all the hops if you're going pelleted. You will still get a little bit of sediment getting through it, but not a big deal. For my money, this is the best way to utilize hops. We sell 600 micron hop filters as well, and you can drop in filters and you can use those definitely. But I recommend this if you're looking to filter and to utilize heavy hop bills. So I've thrown as much as half a pound at it and absolutely had no problems. It does, because you're recirculating all the time, it does clog. It's going to draw all the debris to the filter, and that's kind of the point, right? You can't have the best of both worlds. You can't have unbelievable utilization without this thing becoming a little bit clogged. But what I love about it is, unlike a drop-in filter, which they get clogged and they really restrict utilization, this can easily be serviced with a spoon like this. And all you have to do is just drag it along. You could use a spatula, a silicone spatula as well. Just drag it along when you're whirlpooling, and it opens it up and it lets it flow. Now, I've had some negative kind of comments about the way it works, that you have to maintain it. But I mean, if you want ultimate utilization and you want to make sure that you're not going to get it, in your pump and have your stuff get stuck, nothing sucks more than having, a stuck line or some stuck tubing. So if you want to avoid that, for my money, this is really great investment. This is like an insurance policy. So I'm just going to put it in, and I'll tilt it. I'll just insert it and I'll tilt it to show you what it looks like installed. So you just got to kind of push it in, and there you go. And that's what it looks like installed. Now, I'm going to open the butterfly valve fitting kit. I'll take the valve out. Clamp. We'll take the valve, we'll put a gasket on the valve. I like to hold it over the edge of the counter. There we go. Let's put the element in. Take a clamp. Any one of these back ports is fine. Put the gasket. Open up the clamp. There we go. Let's take the pump. We'll put the pump onto the ball valve in the front, or onto the butterfly valve. So for the pump, we're going to use these 2 FPT fittings. So you want to wrap clockwise. And the more wraps you do, the less twisting you're going to do with the fittings. That's enough. I usually do, at least 6 wraps. Tighten them on. And they've got flat spots on them, so you can finish them with a wrench. And then I just usually like to just finish them with the wrench until they're tight and snugged. Great. Now let's put the pump on in front of that butterfly valve. So we'll take the pump. I'm not sure if you can get a good shot here. Now we've got the pump on. Now we've got here the Whirlpool Arm Kit. And it consists of a butterfly valve, a T, a couple of clamps and gaskets, and a Whirlpool arm, which is really strikingly similar to our hot block filter plate and dip tube. It's because it is. So here we have the dip tube portion. I'll put that in first. And in this case, this is the Whirlpool arm, and it's going to go in the remaining port inside the kettle. So here, I'll just push it in, and I'll give you a view. So that's what it looks like with the Whirlpool arm installed in the inside. Now let's put the butterfly valve on that Whirlpool arm. Now, one thing with the valves, you just want to make sure you're putting them on the right way so that you can open them outwards. I've made the mistake many times of putting the valves on the wrong way, filled up the kettle, and then you can't open the valve. And it's not really how you want to start a brew. So, okay, and that's most of the Whirlpool Arm Kit installed, except the sensor would normally go inside the kettle under the grain basket, but because we're using the Whirlpool Arm Kit, we're moving the sensor to the outside. So we'll take the remaining clamp and gasket out of the Whirlpool Arm Kit, and we'll put that here, and the sensor is going to go right there, okay? Just move that out of the way a little bit. And turn it a little, something like that. We'll angle that way. Okay. So now I'm able to open the valve all the way. All right, maybe I'll move it a little bit more. I'm able to open the valve all the way, and I still have my temperature sensing ability. So there's a reason why, I should do a little explanation here. There's a reason why I like to put the temperature sensor after the pump. It's because in this setup, you could put the temperature sensor in front of the butterfly valve, between the butterfly valve and the kettle. And that's a good spot to put it as well, except you won't be able to use the temperature sensor again if you're using it on the chiller. So if you want to measure the outflow temperature on your coil and coil chiller, it's nice to have it here so that you can repurpose it when you're done mashing. You can always take the T and the temperature sensor and put it on your coil and coil chiller after. If you're not going to do that or use it, it's good practice to put it in front of the butterfly valve. That way, your temperature sensing is always in contact with the brewing system before the valve, so it's at its closest point of reference. Okay, we'll put the retention ring on, and we've got some screws which hold down the retention ring. As soon as I figure out how to open this, we've got 4 little thumb screws. Okay. And now that's not going anywhere. We have a cap, and the cap goes right here on the kettle. Now this is a good place to mount a steam condenser if you want to install a steam condenser after. There we go. Take the grain basket lid, put it on this side. And now we have our grain basket inserted. Now finally we can this is the Vorlauf kit. Now I'm installing the Vorlauf kit. And Vorlaufing is when you're recirculating your mash. And this gives you a much more precise control over your flow due to this really high quality, heavy duty ball valve. I mean, I really think this is actually, it's a really important piece because you can only regulate the flow so much with the butterfly valve, but you can really control really finely exactly how much flow you're going to get over your grain bed with a ball valve like this. So now we've got a couple more things that we can install. And that's the tubing. The silicone tubing. I've already cut it. This is a 2-foot piece. This is going to go inside the grain basket. This is the 3-foot piece. And the 3-foot piece uses the straight barb fittings, okay? We use 2 straight barbs, 1 90 barb. These barb fittings, they are oversized, so they are full port, so you're gonna get the maximum unrestricted flow. They are not super easy to install because they stretch out the silicone a little bit, and you do not need hose clamps with these barb fittings. Perfect. You can see that. And this, okay. So there's a lot of confusion as to when to use the Sparge arm, and I'm going to do my best to explain myself here. The Sparge arm is for sparging. I call this the discharge tubing because it discharges over the grain bed. This discharge tubing assembly is for mashing. You only use it when you're mashing. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to spray your wort over your mash. You want to recirculate the wort over the mash using this. This is for sparging. Now, you can use this, a couple different ways. First, I'm going to install the discharge tubing right here onto the grain basket. You just want to use the discharge tubing when you're mashing. Really, really important. Don't use the sparge arm. And so when I explain when to use the sparge arm is going to be used when you're done the mash. You're done vorlaufing, and what you want to do is you want to raise the grain basket. So I'm going to raise that grain basket. We finished mashing. We've run our sparge out, so we've run a high temperature sparge out. We've lifted the grain basket, the grains are draining. Now would be the time to use the sparge arm. You don't want to pull wort into the sparge arm. You want to use hot water and run that into the sparge arm. Now you would disconnect discharge tubing. You would attach the sparge arm. From here, you would maybe use the recirculating tubing, which is this one here, and you would attach it to another kettle. Now you can always gravity feed it from another kettle, so you could have a kettle up high and you've got a stand, you've got like a gravity feed stand, and you could have one of our Brew kettles up high, you could have a valve, you could open it, you could let it flow through the sparge arm. That would be a good way of doing it. Or you could have another kettle, one of our 10-gallon kettles, and a pump and an element inside of it, and have that set to your sparge temperature, your sparge out temperature, which is around 167 degrees, and you could pump it up to the top of the grain basket and through the sparge arm, but you only want to run fresh water through the sparge arm. So I've heard people say the sparge arm gets clogged. The sparge arm doesn't get clogged if you're using it as a sparge arm. It'll never clog if you use it as a sparge arm, because you're only going to be running water through it. Okay, so it's a really important point. I know I've kind of hammered that one home now, but I think it's important for us as brewers to know the difference between vorlaufing and sparging. And hopefully I'm not too forceful with my point. But here, I'll put this down. And so I've disconnected the discharge tubing, and here I'm attaching the sparge arm. Now you just want to be careful that the holes are facing down, otherwise it'll shoot up into the sky. You don't want that. And this is what it looks like with the sparge arm installed. I'm going to say one more thing. Most of the time when I'm brewing, my personal preference, because I'm in a hurry often, and I like to make my brew days as short as possible. And I really did design the Unibräu system to be an all-in-one, kind of a simple setup, it's a set and forget for me. I don't like sparging. I usually do full volume mashes. The only reason when I do sparge is if I want to go with a higher volume batch, for example, something that's kind of stretching the limits of the Unibräu. It's a lot of grain in there. You've got like 18 pounds of grain or 17 pounds of grain. You're doing something pretty heavy. It's pretty hard to go full volume. You might not have the room. You have to do your calculations beforehand. I use Beersmith. I think it's a great program for that. And I'll do a sparge if I really feel like it's just a little bit too tight. Then I usually reserve some liquid and I'll pump it through the sparge arm. And that's really the only time that I run sparges, because I think the Unibräu system on its own is going to give you a great amount of efficiency. I expect usually in the low 70s, around 72% is kind of what I base most of my calculations on. And once you start getting the hang of the way the system is, get your crush right, get everything right, you're really going to find that sparging, it adds some time and it will give you some efficiency, but maybe efficiency isn't the most important thing. Maybe just brewing really great beer in under 4 hours is kind of what you want to do. So finally, we're going to install the recirculating tubing. And I'll put that here. Here's the SV1 controller. That's the manual and our tri-clamp temperature sensor. And so the temperature sensor is going to be installed on the T. And there we go. So now we have the temperature sensing duties, and this is essentially a complete setup. The discharge tubing, we're always going to start the brew with the discharge tubing installed. This is our SV1. It works in conjunction with the 240 volt setup. It works in conjunction with our SV240. And this controller, I've shown it to you before. The temperature sensor is going to plug in right there, and it's got slots so you can mount it on the wall. You can see I've got one mounted behind me over here, and it works in conjunction with the SV240, like I said, in 240 volts, and it also works just on its own as 120. And this is going to be our new kind of flagship controller that we're shipping with all of our systems. Whether you order the standard or the premium, you're getting this guy. And it's a PID controller, and it can work in a switching controller capacity as well. We've got another video on it. If you want to check it out, you should. Now, you're going to plug this in, obviously, into the wall. Okay, I'm just going to cut that off. So the temperature sensor plugs into the back of our SV1 controller. You can see that. And you can plug the pump into it as well. And there you go. Essentially, mount this on the wall, just like that. So that finishes the build of the premium system. So this SV1 controller is going to be shipped on its own with a 120 volt setup, and it's going to be shipped alongside with our SV240 for our 240 volt setups. We've got a video that we've released that shows how these two controllers work together, and they do that in a little bit more detail than I'm going to. So now all you have to do is, plug in the temperature sensor into the SV1, plug your pump in to the SV1, and we include kind of a patch cable, and that works between the SV240 and it connects to the SV1, and that goes into the heating output. And all you have to do now is just hang this guy on the wall and plug your SV240 in. That's for the 240 volt setup. So this goes to the heating element, and we have our 1430 plug, which goes into your dryer plug. I hope you like this video. If you like what you see, please let us know. If you've got any ideas for us, we want to hear them too. Please like it, subscribe, share, and we'll catch you in the next video.